I was nothing more than a passerby, someone who happened to cross her path by chance. Yet by that accident, I saved Willow Liu, the daughter of the Liu family, when she was standing on the edge of taking her own life after a devastating breakup. I fell in love with her at first sight. I stayed by her side as she slowly pieced herself back together, watched her heal from heartbreak bit by bit, and in the end, I walked hand in hand with her into the hall of marriage. But fate never lets happiness last quietly. A sudden car accident erased 5 full years of her memories, dragging her consciousness back to the year when she was still deeply, hopelessly in love with her first love, Makoto. What I could never have imagined, not even in my worst nightmares, was that my parents-in-law, who would always look down on me, would seize this opportunity. They arranged for Makoto to return to the country, hoping that he and my wife would rekindle their old romance. And what I could never have imagined even more was this. Willow, who once loved her first love so deeply that she nearly gave up her life for him, would calmly ask a single question that froze everyone in place. The sharp scent of disinfectant filled the hospital room, blending with the steady beep, beep of the cardiac monitor. For 3 long days, that sound had been my entire world, until Willow's eyelashes trembled, just once. Only then did my world begin to beat again. For 72 hours, I had stayed right there, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But when she finally opened her eyes on a hospital bed, the first thing I saw in those beautiful eyes wasn't warmth or recognition. It was unfamiliarity and wariness, all of it directed at me. The love we once shared had vanished without a trace. "Who are you?" Her very first words were a question, sharp with doubt, wrapped in challenge. She had woken up, but she had forgotten me. The doctor's words buzzed endlessly in my ears, each one like a dull blade sawing back and forth against my nerves. Hippocampal damage. Retrograde amnesia. How much memory is lost varies from person to person. That phrase, varies from person to person, meant 5 years. 5 years. Everything from when we first met, to falling in love, to getting married. She had forgotten it all. I didn't break down. I didn't even let my grief show, because I knew that any intense emotion right now would only frighten her. I quietly pulled out a chair and sat a few steps away from her bed, at a safe distance. A distance that wouldn't make her feel threatened. "A lot has happened in the past 5 years," I said. "We met 3 years ago, and last December, we got married." I did everything I could to rein in my emotions, recounting those 5 years in the calmest tone I could manage. "Because of the car accident, you lost your memories from the past 5 years. To make her believe me, I took out my phone. My fingers slid across the cold screen and unlocked it. My movements were steady, so steady that even I was scared by how controlled I seemed. The first photo in my gallery appeared. It was us, standing atop a snow-covered mountain in Switzerland. I had wrapped her tightly in my coat. Her nose was red from the cold, yet her smile was brighter than the snowy peaks behind her. I handed her the phone. She looked at it hesitantly. In her eyes, there was confusion. There was caution, but not even the faintest hint of familiarity. Photo after photo slid past. In the lavender fields of Provence, she had tucked a small bundle of purple flowers into my collar. On the stone-paved streets of the capital, she wore a kimono and stood on tiptoe to steal a kiss on my cheek. In our kitchen, she wore my white shirt with completely mismatched pink apron tied around her waist. Flowers smudged her face as she waved a spatula at me like a little menace. The woman in those photos, her smiling eyes, her gentle brows, was the image carved permanently into my heart. But that overflowing happiness, that warmth that once filled her entire being, the Willow standing before me now couldn't understand it at all. I watched her closely, searching for even the smallest crack, the slightest softening in her icy expression. There was nothing. Her brows knit slightly, as if she were flipping through a stranger's photo album, one that had nothing to do with her. "That's not me." I could read those words clearly in her gaze. At least, not the version of herself that existed in her memory. I forced myself to meet her clear, yet distant eyes. "You don't have to believe me right away," I said. "You can investigate on your own. Ask all your friends." Then, swallowing the bitterness rising in my throat, I added carefully, word by word, But before that, I have a suggestion. Let's not tell the outside world about your memory loss for now. That way, we can avoid anyone with ulterior motives taking advantage of you. And when you interact with others, you can judge from their reactions whether what I'm saying is true. She nodded slightly. The distance in her eyes finally loosened just a little. Then she handed the phone back to me. The car accident, she asked quietly. How did it happen? That question was like a key, unlocking the gate behind my carefully maintained calm. My atoms apple-bobbed uncontrollably. The heavy stone in my chest, which had only just settled when she woke up, was hoisted up again, crushing my heart. My nails dug deep into my palms. It was to save me. The images from that moment, the screech of tires against the road, the force of her hands pushing against my chest, the instant her eyes lost their light as she fell, exploded in my mind all over again. An out-of-control car came speeding toward us. You pushed me out of the way. The moment my words fell, bang, a deafening crash echoed as the hospital room door flew open, slamming violently into the wall like it had been rammed by a wild beast. And the instant I saw who it was, my blood nearly froze. It was Makoto, Willow's first love, the man who had plunged her into 2 full years of heartbreak. And now, with her memories rolled back 5 years, Willow had returned precisely to the age of 20, to the time when she loved Makoto the most. The realization made every muscle in my body tense. Makoto wore a perfectly tailored beige trench coat. His hair was slightly damp, as if he had rushed through a sudden downpour. His face carried just the right mix of urgency and weariness. He had always known how to present his best self, carefully wrapped in the most heart-stirring circumstances. I didn't even need to turn around. I could feel it. The body behind me, tense and vigilant just moments ago, quietly relaxed. Those eyes that had held only unfamiliarity and scrutiny when looking at me lit up the instant they landed on Makoto. In that light, there was surprise. There was joy. And there was also something else. Something I knew far too well. Something that pierced straight through me. Infatuation. In that moment, a cruel truth became painfully clear. To the present Willow, I, George, was a stranger who needed to be verified again and again. But Makoto was someone who belonged to her soul. Someone who needed no proof at all. The moment Makoto stepped into the room, he crossed the distance to the bedside in a single stride. His voice trembled. His eyes were rimmed red. Thank God, Willow, you're finally awake. I'm sorry. This is all my fault. If I hadn't gone abroad back then, if I had been by your side, none of this would have happened. As he spoke, he reached out, trying to take Willow's right hand where it rested outside the blanket. I was so angry that I nearly laughed. My wife had lost her memory, but that didn't give anyone the right to take advantage of the situation and barge in however they pleased. Before Makoto's fingertips could even touch Willow, I reached out, grabbed his arm, and yanked him backward. He stumbled, forced away from the hospital bed, ignoring my parents-in-law, who had followed Makoto into the room, their usual scrutiny and dissatisfaction already directed at me. I fixed him with an icy stare. Mr. Ito, mind yourself, I said coldly. Willow is my wife. Forced away like that, Makoto Ito spun around, his eyes blazing with so-called righteous fury. George, how can you be so selfish? He shouted. How long were you planning to keep this hidden? Willow has lost her memory, and you actually dared not tell Uncle and Annie? You want to take advantage of the fact that she doesn't remember anything and keep deceiving her? As Makoto hurled accusation after accusation at me, my mother-in-law had already rushed to Willow's side, clutching her hand tightly as tears streamed down her face. My foolish daughter, you've suffered so much, she sobbed. Just look at the life you've lived these past few years. We told you back then, George, never mind. Now that Makoto is back, everything will be fine. My father-in-law chimed in sharply from the side. This is what you call taking good care of my daughter, he snapped. You really planned things well. Married for barely half a year, and you couldn't wait to make your move. What an ungrateful wolf in human skin. As their words fell one after another, I could clearly see the change in Willow's eyes. From caution to fear and finally to disgust. That gaze chilled me to the bone, but I couldn't retreat. Behind me stood the woman I loved. Even if she no longer recognized me, I still had a responsibility to make sure she wasn't misled. I slowly released my grip on Makoto's arm and turned toward my father-in-law, dropping the honorific for the first time. "Mr. Liu," I said calmly, "the car accident was my failure. I didn't protect her. It was the truth." Then I shifted my gaze to Makoto. But that incompetence shouldn't become a stage for someone else's performance. My eyes swept across Makoto, and then my parents-in-law. My voice wasn't loud, but every word rang clearly in the room. The driver who caused the accident is at the police station. The statements are all on record, and the reason the car lost control is documented in detail. If you don't believe it, with your influence, it wouldn't be hard to verify it yourselves. Then I turned back to the two elders whose faces had darkened. "Dad, Mom, Willow needs to rest. If there's anything to discuss, we can do it outside. Don't scare her here with conjectures and theatrics." "I don't know who's putting on a show," Makoto sneered coldly, shaking off the restraint and stepping forward again. "You, Makoto." A cool, slightly weak voice cut cleanly through the tension. It was Willow. The affection was still there in the eyes she turned toward him, but now there was also something else. Probing, composed, sharp. "You went abroad later?" she asked. Such a simple question, yet lodged in Makoto's throat like a fishbone, instantly making his dramatic display of emotion look ridiculous. His expression froze. After a long moment, he hurriedly tried to explain. "Willow, there was a reason for that. Listen to me." Willow ignored him. Her gaze sharpened even further. "When did you come back?" Makoto's eyes began to dart away. His voice turned vague. Just recently. As soon as I heard something had happened to you, I rushed over." "So that means," Willow continued calmly, "up until I got married, you were abroad all those years, right?" She lowered her eyes, making it impossible to read her expression. Unconsciously, she began gently rubbing the base of her left ring finger with the thumb of her right hand. That spot, up until the car accident, had held the wedding ring I designed for her. The motion lasted only a moment before she abruptly stopped, as if burned. A flicker of surprise flashed through her eyes. Watching quietly from the side, I felt a subtle ripple stir in my chest. Rubbing her ring finger, while thinking was a habit Willow had only developed after marrying me. Makoto's face fell instantly. In his anxiety, he tried to step closer to the hospital bed again, but there was no chance I would allow that. I stepped directly between them, blocking him with unyielding firmness. "So," Willow lifted her head once more. This time, her gaze deliberately avoided Makoto entirely, completely disregarding his pale excuses. She looked straight at her parents. "My marriage to this Mr. Wong," she said evenly, "is real, right?" A trace of undisguised awkwardness flashed across her father's face. He cleared his throat several times before forcing out a response. "That's technically true, but since you've already—" "Oh." Willow cut him off without hesitation. "I'm tired. I want to rest for a while." Her gaze swept across everyone in the room, me included. "Could I ask all of you to leave?" The door of the hospital room closed softly behind me. Sealing off the world I shared with Willow. Left standing in the corridor were only Makoto and the Liu parents, their faces dark with displeasure. The air seemed to freeze. Under the harsh white lights, our shadows stretched long and distorted across the floor. "George, let's talk," Makoto said first. The feigned urgency had drained from his handsome face, replaced by cold, condescending arrogance. I ignored him and turned instead to my parents-in-law. Even though the looks in their eyes were chilling, I maintained basic courtesy. "Dad, Mom, Willow needs quiet rest. I understand your concerns, but emotions won't solve anything right now." My mother-in-law snorted and turned her head away, clearly unwilling to say another word to me. My father-in-law kept his grim expression, his scrutinizing gaze sweeping over me. "George, you'd better pray that Willow comes out of this safely. Otherwise, right now, the one Willow loves is me." Makoto cut in, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. He stepped in front of me and deliberately adjusted the collar of his expensive trench coat, his eyes filled with contempt. "You're nothing but the owner of a small company. Average education. relying on a few petty tricks to take advantage of the situation. And I, he continued, am the heir of the Ito family. What I can give Willow is a height you couldn't reach even if you struggled your entire life. Tell me, what do you have to compete with me? Willow and I are the true match. George, you're just the other man, a laughable substitute. Now that the real one is back, it's time for you to get lost. I looked at his face, overflowed with arrogance and superiority, and suddenly found it a little amusing. Mr. Ito, I said calmly, your confidence is as blindly misplaced as ever. The smile on his face froze. All those colorful photos of you fooling around abroad, drifting from party to party. Do you need me to print them out so Willow can enjoy them properly? And that overseas degree you're so proud of. I continued evenly, how is it that I've heard you were once publicly reported under your real name for academic fraud? Even though the matter was eventually suppressed, rumors don't arise without reason, do they? My tone remained calm, but it was like a precise scalpel slicing open his polished exterior. There's something else I'm even more curious about. I took a step closer, forcing him backward, locking eyes with his now avoiding gaze. Ever since Willow decided to be with me, I've heard your position in the Ito family has become a little delicate, especially after your capable younger brother was transferred from a branch company back to headquarters. It seems Uncle Ito has started relying on him more. So what's really going on here? I asked quietly. Could it be that the greatest value of you, the so-called heir, is nothing more than marrying into the Liu family? Each word struck like a needle, piercing straight into the most fragile part of his pride. Makoto's face shifted from white to red, then to a sickly green. His entire body trembled with rage as he pointed at me, sputtering. You. For a long time, he couldn't refute a single word. In the end, he could only spit out a hollow threat. Just you wait. Then he turned and left in a sorry rush, under my parents-in-law's complicated gazes. I didn't look at him again. Turning, I headed back toward the hospital room, but my mother-in-law stepped directly in front of me, her face filled with undisguised disgust. What are you trying to do now? My father-in-law's expression was just as grim. Haven't you made my daughter miserable enough? George, he continued coldly, we have things to say to Willow alone. You should go back. As his words fell, the door to the hospital room opened slightly from the inside. It was Willow. She leaned weakly against the doorframe, her face still pale, yet her eyes were strikingly clear. Mr. Wong, she said to me calmly, your company is just starting out. You must have many things to take care of. You should go back to work. My parents are here with me. There was no emotion in her voice, only distance, a distance that left no room for refusal. I looked at her, my throat tightening. I had 1,000 words I wanted to say, but not a single one came out. In the end, I only nodded. All right, I said quietly, get some good rest. I turned and walked away, my steps unbearably heavy. When I stepped out of the hospital building, the cold night wind struck my face, but I felt no chill at all. I took out my phone and dialed a number. Keep a close eye on someone for me, Makoto Ito from the Ito family. He's just returned to the country. I want every detail of his movements, no matter how small. After hanging up, I looked up at the brightly lit window of Willow's hospital room and stood there for a long time. When I returned to the hospital room the next day, carrying a thermal container, Makoto was already there. The room was filled with an overly sweet scent of roses. Makoto stood beside the bed, holding a large bouquet of vivid red roses, eagerly trying to hand them to Willow. On the bedside table sat several high-end food boxes, clearly expensive at a glance, each stamped with the logo of a private luxury kitchen. Expressionless, I walked over and casually pushed the offending food boxes onto the floor. Bang! A dull sound echoed through the room. Then I placed the thermal container steadily in the spot most convenient for Willow. The noise in the room died instantly. Makoto's smile froze. My parents-in-law's expressions darkened. I ignored them, bent down, and spoke gently to Willow. I made some fish soup. Have a little while it's hot. Willow's gaze finally shifted away from the glaring roses and landed on my face. Her pale lips moved slightly. She didn't look at Makoto at all. The flowers are too glaring, she said softly. Take them away? Makoto's face immediately turned awkward. My mother-in-law hurried to smooth things over. Willow, Makoto prepared these especially for you. Aren't they beautiful? I said take them away. Willow's voice was still soft, but the firmness in it was unmistakable. I looked at Makoto coldly and said flatly, Mr. Ito, do you not understand plain language? Willow told you to take the flowers away. Or would you prefer to continue yesterday's unfinished conversation with me? Makoto Ito's face cycled through shades of green and white. In the end, under a pointed look from my father-in-law, he could only awkwardly clutch the bouquet and retreat out of the room. The air in the hospital room finally felt clean again. Only then did Willow lift her head and look toward Makoto, who had stopped helplessly outside the door. She watched him quietly, for a long time, so long that fine beads of sweat began to form on Makoto's forehead. Makoto, she finally said, her voice calm like still water, when I look at you, I do feel happy. I used to be deeply attached to that feeling. Makoto's eyes lit up as if he'd seized a lifeline, and he hurried to speak. But Willow changed direction without giving him any chance to interrupt. But do you know, she continued, when I woke up and saw you again this time, I felt a constant sense of distance. That feeling didn't make sense until I learned that you went abroad. Willow, it's not like that. Listen to me, Makoto panicked. You can't stop me from going overseas just because you love me, he said hurriedly. You can't stop me from becoming a better person. That wouldn't be fair to me. He rolled out that familiar, well-practiced line. Willow suddenly laughed. There was a trace of icy mockery in her smile. I stopped you from becoming a better person? She lifted her eyes, and the gaze in those beautiful eyes turned sharp as a blade. In your mind, becoming better meant studying abroad on a degree bought with family money, while partying with blonde bombshells night after night. You always said that if I loved you, I should support everything you did. But while I was supporting you, you never seemed to think that staying loyal to me was something you owed. So what you're saying is, she continued steadily, because I loved you, I deserve to pay for all your moods and indulgences? Makoto was struck completely dumb. His face drained from red to white, then to a sickly green. Cold sweat poured down. Willow, that was all in the past. So are we. Willow cut off his feeble excuses calmly. Makoto completely broke down. He took a step forward, his voice cracking. Willow, give me one more chance. Please, just one. I stepped forward as well, silently placing myself between him and the hospital bed, fixing him with an icy stare. Makoto's sobbing plea came to an abrupt halt at my movement. Willow shifted her gaze away from his face and looked out the window, toward the bare, leafless tree outside. Her eyes were hollow. Makoto, she said quietly, some mistakes don't come with second chances. I could tolerate your youthful recklessness. I could tolerate your impatience, because I believe people could grow. But you should never have crossed the bottom line. Once principles are broken, even once, there will be countless times after that. And I have neither the interest nor the energy to forgive you endlessly. I can choose not to love. I can choose not to marry. But I will never accept a betrayer. You know that. I hate compromising myself. She withdrew her gaze and looked at him one last time. The remnants of affection in her eyes were completely buried beneath a resolute, icy finality. I admit it. I still love you. But from the moment I learned that you betrayed me, I no longer wanted to keep loving you. Makoto staggered back 2 steps, utterly lost. His lips moved, but not a single word came out. My parents-in-law looked just as terrible. They clearly wanted to say something, yet under Willow's clear, unwavering gaze, they too fell silent. The room sank into deathly stillness. In the end, Makoto left the hospital room like a puppet drained of all spirit, dragging his heavy steps in miserable defeat. Silence filled the room. I looked at Willow. She remained in the same posture, her back straight, like a cold plum blossom standing firm against wind and snow. And then, my pupils suddenly contracted. A drop of bright red liquid slipped through the gaps between the fingers of her left hand and fell onto the snow-white bedsheet. So glaring, my heart felt as if it had been seized violently by an invisible hand. Even my breathing stopped for a moment. I strode forward. Ignoring her shock and weak resistance, I forcibly took hold of her tightly clenched left hand. Her palm was icy cold and damp. I couldn't tell whether it was cold sweat or blood. One finger at a time, using the gentlest force I could manage, I pried open her curled fingers. A white shard of porcelain, its edges razor sharp, was embedded deep in her palm. Blood soaked everything. I stared at the vicious wound, then raised my eyes to meet her stubborn gaze, shimmering with moisture. The pain in my chest was so intense I could barely breathe. It had taken her 2 full years to barely crawl out of the shadow left by breaking up with Makoto. And now, by a cruel twist of fate, she was being forced, at the very moment she loved the most, to face his betrayal all over again. The depth of that pain was far beyond anything I had imagined. She had severed her past with her own hands, and in the cruelest way possible, punished a part of herself that still loved. She tried to pull her hand back, but her strength was pitifully weak. "Let go," she said hoarsely. I ignored her. With my other hand, I hit the call button beside the bed without hesitation. Only then did I slowly lift my head and look coldly at my stunned parents-in-law. "Is this what you wanted?" Forcing her to see someone she didn't want to see, hear things she didn't want to hear, making her tear open her own wounds again just after she woke up. "Are you satisfied now?" Their faces shifted between pale and livid. For a long time, not a single word came out. The nurse pushed the door open quickly, the moment she saw the injury on Willow's hand. She was startled as well. "Mr. Wong will take it from here." I nodded and stepped aside, making room for her to clean and dress the wound. From that day on, Makoto never appeared again. My parents-in-law's visits also became rare. Each time they came, their expressions were complicated, as if there were many things they wanted to say. Yet in the end, all that remained were a few perfunctory reminders before they left. The cloying scent of roses in the hospital room faded long ago. In its place was a warm, homely aroma of the soups and stews I brought every day. A full month passed like this, quiet and uneventful. Willow recovered well. The wound in her palm scabbed over, leaving behind only a faint pink scar. The day she was discharged, the weather was beautiful. I took care of all the procedures. She had changed out her hospital gown and was wearing an ivory-colored long dress I had brought for her. She stood quietly by the window, watching the traffic flowing below. Sunlight filtered through the glass, outlining her figure in a soft golden glow, making her look like a fragile painting. On the way home, neither of us spoke. She leaned against the car window, silently watching the streets rush past, like a traveler newly arrived, trying to memorize the shape of the city. Our home was a high-rise apartment in the city center. It wasn't as grand or imposing as the Liu family's villa, but every piece of decor inside had been chosen and arranged by her and me together. I opened the door. A familiar warmth rushed toward us. Sunlight poured into the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, scattering bright patches across the floor. Tiny dust motes floated in the air. By the entryway sat her favorite pair of fluffy slippers. On the living room wall hung photos from our travels together. On the balcony, the succulents she had been raising were thriving under my care, lush and green. On the counter, a vase of white irises still looked fresh. I had changed them that morning before leaving. Everything here remained exactly as it had been when she left, filled with traces of a life once lived. She stood at the doorway, not stepping inside right away, just looking. In those clear eyes, the vigilance and distance she'd shown in the hospital were gone, replaced by something else. A quiet, indescribable sense of ease, like a small boat that had drifted for a long time, finally finding a harbor where it could dock. She changed into the slippers and slowly walked into this completely unfamiliar home. She didn't speak. She simply let her fingertips brush over the soft back of the sofa, over the books we had placed side by side on the shelves, over the cool surface of the dining table. At last, her gaze settled on me. She walked over slowly and raised her left hand. In the sunlight, I could clearly see the faint marks circling the base of her ring finger. Unconsciously, she used the thumb of her right hand to gently rub that empty spot. "Where's my ring?" Her voice was very soft. Yet it was like a pebble dropped into the lake of my heart, still and silent for a month, sending ripples outward. I took a velvet box out of my pocket, opened it. The wedding ring I had designed for her myself lay quietly inside, the diamond's facets reflecting tiny shards of light. I handed it to her. She took the ring without hesitation and naturally slipped it back onto the ring finger of her left hand. It fit perfectly, as if it had never left. She raised her hand and looked at the ring she had regained, her eyes filled with familiarity and attachment even she couldn't quite understand. After a long moment, she lowered her hand and looked up at me calmly. "George, I'm sorry." I paused slightly. The things I said to Makoto in the hospital. She lowered her eyes. Her voice carried a trace of weariness that was hard to detect. "I was actually saying them to you too." My heart felt as if it were gently clenched by an invisible hand. "You know it. I still love him deeply," she continued. "Even if reason tells me he isn't worth it, that instinctive inertia still causes me pain. So I had to use the harshest possible way to cut it off completely. Because to me, there is no second chance when it comes to love." Her gaze drifted toward the window, her eyes growing distant and sorrowful. Just like my parents, they came together for a family alliance, loving spouses in public. But behind closed doors, each living their own separate lives, betraying each other, tormenting each other. I grew up watching that. So the thing I despise most is compromising myself. She withdrew her gaze and looked back at me. For the first time, vulnerability and apology surfaced in her beautiful eyes. "I'm sorry. Someone who has just personally strangled her own love. Right now, all I feel is exhaustion and numbness. I even doubt whether I still have the ability to fall in love with someone else. So someone like me isn't worthy of being your wife. If you want a divorce, I'll accept it. The marital property can be divided with me as the party at fault. I won't object at all. Consider compensation for your feelings." My throat felt blocked. Not a single word would come out. I could only look at her, watch her calmly say the most cruel things, laying herself completely bare before me. She paused, as if giving me time to absorb it all. Then she continued, her tone carrying a trace of negotiation. "But if, because you still love me, you don't want to separate, then at the very least, I must take responsibility for hurting your feelings and for my responsibility as a wife. We can live together for 1 year. For that year, we'll live like a real married couple. If I regain my memories, or if I can fall in love with you again, then we'll keep going. If after 1 year I'm still like this, then we separate. 1 year is the limit for you and for me. After that, bridge to bridge, road to road. We go our separate ways, each wishing the other well." She placed every choice into my hands. After hearing her words, I felt not the slightest trace of anger, only an overwhelming ache. My heart ached for my girl, the girl who had spent 2 full years clawing her way out of a failed relationship, who had finally learned how to love again, only to be forced by a cruel accident to walk that thorn-filled path of pain once more in an even more brutal way. I stepped forward and gently took the hand on which she wore the ring. Her fingertips were cold. "All right," I said without hesitation. 1 year. I could feel her body relax just a fraction at my answer. Looking into her eyes, I spoke slowly and clearly. "But, Willow, you need to remember this. This is not your fault. Neither in the past nor now have you done anything wrong. Even losing your memory happened because you were saving me. So, don't talk about not being worthy. And don't apologize. The one who should apologize is me, because I failed to protect you." I pressed her cold hand against my cheek, warming it little by little with my own body heat. "You don't need to force yourself to do anything. And you don't need to feel any pressure. You just need to be yourself, just like before. That's enough." My warm palm held her cold fingertips. She didn't pull away. She simply let me lead her in quiet compliance. There was no affection in that compliance, only the calm of fulfilling a contract. Everything in this house was unfamiliar to her, including me. Night fell. When I came out after showering, she was already standing at the door of the master bedroom. She was wearing the silk nightgown I had prepared for her, but over it she had put on a thick coat, like a layer of self-protective armor. She looked at me, as if waiting for me to make the first move. The air was thick with a wordless standoff. I understood what she was thinking. In her understanding, fulfilling a wife's duty probably also included sharing a bed. I said nothing. I walked straight into the room and took out a spare quilt and pillow from the wardrobe. Watching my actions, she finally spoke, confusion creeping into her voice. "What are you doing?" "I'm sleeping in the guest room." I held the pillow and walked past her. "We're married," she reminded me. There was no willingness in her tone, only a stiff, almost doctrinal rigidity. I stopped and turned back to look at her. "Willow," I said quietly, "I agreed to spend a year with you, not to make you force yourself. You don't need to act like a proper wife in front of me. I just want you to be Willow. Good night." With that, I didn't linger. I walked into the guest room and gently closed the door. That was how our cohabitation began. Strange, distant, almost like roommates sharing a space rather than husband and wife. She had lost 5 years' worth of work experience and professional knowledge. For now, there was no way she could return to the Liu family's business. My parents-in-law seemed to tacitly accept this and no longer pushed her. As a result, she spent most of her time at home. She read books she had once studied but no longer remembered, tried to rebuild her professional foundation from scratch. But more often than not, she would simply sit there, lost in a daze. Our floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a vast river cutting through the city, its waters flowing endlessly day and night. She often hugged her knees and sat on the carpet for an entire afternoon without moving. She didn't speak. She showed no expression, like a beautiful sculpture that had lost its soul. I knew what she was enduring. She was processing the pain connected to Makoto, the pain that had been dragged back into the light against her will. She had severed her past in the most decisive way possible, but wounds like that still needed time to heal. So I never disturbed her. Every morning before leaving, I changed the water in the vase of white irises. When I came home, I cooked meals for 2. She didn't eat much, but she always finished quietly and then said, "Thank you." Polite, distant, like 2 strangers who had only just met. My company was at a critical stage of growth. A key project had hit a bottleneck, and I was overwhelmed, running on just 3 or 4 hours of sleep night after night. That evening, I dragged my exhausted body home after midnight. The living room lights were off. Only moonlight poured through the huge windows, laying a thin layer of silvery frost across the floor. I thought she had already gone to bed, but as I changed my shoes, I noticed a familiar slender silhouette. She was still sitting by the window, holding the same posture I had seen countless times before, staring motionlessly at the river outside. Something pricked softly at my heart. I lightened my steps, walked over, took off my coat, and gently draped it over her shoulders. Her body trembled slightly, as if she were waking from a long dream. She turned her head. In the moonlight, her face was so pale it was almost translucent. "You're back!" Her voice was hoarse, still tinged with lingering confusion. So soon, I crouched down so we were eye to eye. "It's already 12:30, Willow." A flash of surprise crossed her eyes, followed by quiet realization. She had been sitting there again, for an entire afternoon and an entire evening. Time had completely lost meaning for her. "Sorry," she murmured, lowering her head. "I lost track of time." "It's okay." I adjusted the coat around her shoulders. "It gets cold at night. Go back to your room and sleep." She nodded, stood up, and silently walked back to the master bedroom. I watched her figure disappear behind the door, then slowly sat down in the spot she had just occupied. Outside, the river shimmered faintly under the moonlight, cold, distant, and silent, just like the gap between her and me, a chasm that felt impossible to cross. The next day, I made a decision. I came home early and moved a large stack of documents into the study. She looked surprised. "What's this?" "I'll be working from home from now on," I explained calmly. "Most of the company's business can be handled online anyway. There's not much difference." She was silent for a moment, then said softly, "It'll still be inconvenient in some ways. Those are small things." I smiled and reached out, intending to touch her cheek, then stopped halfway, forcing myself to pull my hand back with a hint of apology. But in the very next second, She reached out with her own cool hand and held mine. Then, firmly, she pressed my palm against her cheek. Warmth and cold met in that instant. From then on, I spent most of my time at home. She gradually grew used to coming into the study to read. "There's no window here," she said. A week later, I was nearly being driven mad by a collaboration project. My brows were tightly knotted as I stared at the documents. The study door opened silently. It was Willow. She carried a cup of hot milk and walked in without making a sound. She gently placed a warm cup beside my hand, careful not to make even the slightest noise. I rubbed my aching temples, sighed, picked up the milk, and gave her a grateful look. "Trouble?" She sat across from me, her gaze drifting to the document spread across my desk. "The Angel Tech Group project?" she asked, still torn between option A and option B. My heart skipped. I hadn't expected her to speak up on her own. I tugged at my tie and nodded. "Yeah, Voyage Capital in Plan A is too greedy. But Plan B, the terms look good, yet something just feels off." She leaned against the desk, unconsciously rubbing her wedding ring, and spoke in an exceptionally calm tone. "What you're struggling with right now isn't actually choosing between A and B." I looked up at her. A faint smile appeared as she continued. "You're boxed in by the idea of cooperation. When both options have obvious flaws, maybe the problem isn't the options, but why there are only two options to begin with." My eyebrows shot up. She raised two fingers and laid it out methodically. "The problem is actually very simple. 2 points. First, funding. Company B promises to advance the capital. That's precisely its biggest red flag. Angel Tech's project has a payout cycle of at least a year and a half. Company B is a rising startup. Where is it getting the cash flow to fund a project that could run into hundreds of millions? Where is that money coming from? Have you checked its affiliated investors and recent large capital movements? Is it possible that someone inside Angel Tech, an executive, is funneling benefits through Company B as a shell, moving the project from the left hand to the right? A cold sweat instantly broke out across my back. Because I trusted Angel Tech's reputation, I had only examined Company B superficially, never from this angle. Her tone remained calm. "Second, risk. What you need to consider isn't how much you'll earn if things go smoothly, but what you'll lose in the worst-case scenario. With A, the worst outcome is low profit and exhaustion, but your company survives. With B, if its capital chain is fabricated or there's a hidden trap, and something goes wrong mid-project, you'll be the one trapped. Your company could be dragged down by a single decision." She looked at me and asked, word by word, "Can you afford that gamble right now?" After saying that, she returned to her seat and quietly resumed reading her finance book. As for me, it was as if I'd been struck by lightning, my entire body frozen. In my mind, I was suddenly thrown back to an afternoon 2 years ago. Back then, I had been wavering between starting my own business and taking a stable job. She had asked me 2 questions. First, are you willing to spend your entire life in that kind of job? Second, do you want to take a bold gamble in your life? I had answered, no, and I want to gamble. She had smiled, bright as a summer sun, patted her chest, and said, "Then what are you hesitating for? Go do it. If you fail, just smile for me. Your sister will support you." I pulled myself out of the memory and looked again at the quiet girl reading in front of me. The memories were gone, but the intelligence carved into her soul, the decisiveness, the clarity that cut straight to the core was still there. She was still her, my Willow. In that moment, the heaviness that had weighed on my heart for days seemed to be effortlessly blown away by a few simple words. I looked at her, my throat tightening. The emptiness in my chest was filled once more with warmth. From that day in the study, the atmosphere between us quietly changed. That invisible barrier, solid as ice yet untouchable, seemed to have been chipped open by her calm, incisive words, leaving behind a thin crack. At last, a sliver of sunlight could seep through. I continued working from home, and the study became the place where we spent most of our days. She no longer sat silently in the corner, clutching a book. Sometimes she would glance up, see me frowning at my screen, and casually toss out an observation, often striking straight at the heart of the problem. I realized that although she had lost the knowledge and experience accumulated over 5 years, her innate business instinct and insight were etched deep into her soul. They had never truly disappeared. And I, too, gradually stopped avoiding her. When problems arose, I actively sought her advice, spreading complex reports and plans across the desk. She would study them carefully, slender fingers tracing cold numbers, brows drawn together, eyes sharp and focused. That version of her slowly overlapped with the Willow in my memories, the decisive woman who moved through the business world without hesitation. Then, naturally, we began talking about things beyond work. She asked me about amusing incidents at my company, and I told her which programmer had lost a few more strands of hair battling a stubborn bug. She listened, and the corners of her lips would lift into a faint smile, so faint it was almost imperceptible. Yet it was enough to send my heart racing. At some point, the polite thank you between us quietly disappeared. In its place came the cup of hot tea she would silently set beside me when I worked late into the night, and the sight of her wandering over while I was busy in the kitchen, somewhat clumsily trying to help. Everything was moving in a good direction, slowly but steadily, until the day the difficult project of my company finally found a perfect solution under her guidance, and I successfully signed the contract. When I got home that evening, my mood was lighter than it had been in a long time. After dinner, she didn't go off to read as she usually did. Instead, she stood in front of the wall covered in our photos, quietly studying them. Her gaze moved from the snowy mountains of Switzerland to the lavender fields of Provence, to the stone-paved streets of the capital. Finally, it settled on a photo taken in our kitchen, of her wearing my white shirt, flowers smudged on her face, brandishing a spatula at me. She stared at it for a very long time, so long that I thought she was simply lost in thought. "George," she suddenly spoke. Her voice carried a tone I had never heard before, a mix of uncertainty and solemn resolve. I walked over to her side. "I want to go out for a walk." My heart skipped. She turned to look at me. In those clear eyes, always veiled by a thin mist, my reflection appeared distinctly. "I want to see the places in these photos," she said softly. "I want to walk the paths we once walked together." She paused, a hint of anticipation flashing through her gaze. Something even she didn't seem to notice. "Maybe I'll remember." My throat tightened. I could only nod firmly. "All right." Our first stop was a flower shop. It wasn't far from our place, right on a street corner, small but tastefully decorated, with the freshest bouquets always displayed out front. Ever since we got married, the white irises in our home had always come from here. I pushed open the glass door, and the wind chimes rang with a crisp, cheerful sound. The owner, a kind middle-aged woman, immediately smiled when she saw me. "Mr. Wong, you're here early today." Then her gaze fell on Willow beside me, and the smile on her face grew even warmer. "And the missus came along too? Are you feeling better? We heard you were hospitalized a while ago. Everyone in the neighborhood was so worried." Willow's body stiffened slightly, but she still nodded politely. "I'm much better now. Thank you for your concern." I took her slightly cool hand and said softly, "We like a bouquet of white irises." "Of course. Same as usual, right?" The owner replied with a smile, deftly selecting, trimming, and wrapping the flowers. Willow's gaze was drawn to the clusters of pure white petals. In the sunlight, the white was almost translucent, carrying a kind of untainted, sacred purity. "Why irises?" she asked softly. Whether she was asking me or herself, I couldn't tell. My thoughts were instantly pulled back to a gentle, breezy evening 3 years ago. Back then, I had just started working part-time at this flower shop, clumsily learning how to handle flowers. She had just begun stepping away from that sorrow-filled bridge, willing to wander aimlessly with me through the dusk-lit streets. There was still an inescapable melancholy between her brows and eyes, but she was already willing to offer me the faintest smile. That day, we happened to pass by this very shop. Looking at the riot of colorful flowers inside, I asked her on a whim, "What's your favorite flower?" She stopped and turned to look at me. The glow of the setting sun spilled across her face, tinting her eyelashes gold. Her brows curved gently. It was the first time I had ever seen her smile so brightly. Irises. Why? I pressed. She blinked at me playfully. In that instant, her usual sadness and composure vanished, leaving behind a lively, vivid girl. In Greek mythology, irises are associated with the rainbow. The rainbow? I was completely confused. It's a riddle, she said with a smile, a hint of smug delight in her voice. And I've already made it very simple. Try to guess what's the answer to my riddle. I looked into her sparkling eyes, filled with fragments of starlight and expectation. My heart was pounding. I didn't guess correctly. I was just an ordinary engineering student, my head full of code and formulas. I couldn't grasp something so poetic and romantic. Embarrassed, I scratched my head and guessed all sorts of things. Rainbow bridges, divine messengers. But she only laughed and shook her head. The next day, I spent my part-time wages on a huge bouquet of white irises. Then I waited for her by the bridge, holding the flowers. When she saw me and the pure white bouquet in my arms, she froze for a moment, then smiled. That smile was even brighter than the day before, like a sky freshly washed by rain, clean and luminous. She didn't ask about the riddle again. She simply took the flowers and held them carefully, tenderly, as if they were something precious. And in that moment, a line I had once read somewhere suddenly surfaced in my mind. I had forgotten the exact wording, but the meaning stayed with me. Before I met you, I never thought about getting married. After I met you, I never thought about marrying anyone else. George. Willow's voice pulled me back from the rising tide of memories. I returned to myself and saw her looking at me with a curious, probing gaze. The florist had already handed over the wrapped bouquet. I reached out and took it. Because you said you liked them, I replied softly, meeting her eyes. I didn't mention the riddle. I didn't reveal the answer either. I thought, perhaps it would be better if she remembered it on her own. She accepted the bouquet, lowered her head, and gently inhaled the crisp, clean scent clinging to the petals. Confusion lingered in her eyes. Unconsciously, she used the thumb of her right hand to lightly rub the wedding ring on her left ring finger. The movement was so natural, as if she had done it thousands of times before. After leaving the flower shop, we walked slowly along the street. The sunlight was just right. The breeze was gentle. She held the irises in her arms as she walked beside me, half an arm's length between us. Not far, but not close either. Did we often take walks like this before? She suddenly asked. MHM. I nodded. Almost every day. What did we talk about? She sounded puzzled. We don't seem to have many things in common. I smiled. Yeah, not many things in common. I still clearly remembered how awkward our earliest conversations had been, almost like we were speaking just to fill the silence. I talked to her about von Neumann architecture and Turing machines, and she listened in a daze. She talked to me about the Basel Accords and quantitative easing, and I felt like I was listening to a foreign language. I would enthusiastically analyze the latest international political situation, and she would calmly point out where my views were overly simplistic. Sometimes she would talk about metaphors in literature, Camus' Sisyphus, or Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude. I didn't understand most of it, but I liked the sound of her voice. Cool and clear, like a mountain stream, able to instantly smooth away all my restlessness. I liked watching her speak even more. She was always so focused, so serious, her words filled with unique sharpness and insight. In those beautiful eyes shimmered the light of wisdom and critical thought, an attraction I found impossible to resist. I had never met a girl like her, born into privilege, yet without a trace of arrogance, brilliant beyond measure, yet never flaunting her intelligence. She was a bundle of contradictions, someone who saw the world with piercing clarity, yet carried a quiet, unintentional kindness. That contradiction gave her a fatal kind of allure. At least, to the boy I was back then, someone who had nothing but passion and unrealistic dreams. It was irresistible. At first, I only meant to offer a bit of simple kindness, to look after the heartbroken girl who always lingered by the bridge. But at some point, going to bridge every evening just to wait for her became a habit I couldn't quit. My solitary walks, once meant for thinking, were completely replaced by the desire to talk to her. We talked about everything. I said to Willow beside me, your finance, my code, politics and history, literature and philosophy. Even though we didn't really understand each other's fields back then, somehow we could just keep talking. She listened, surprise flickering across her face. Really? That sounds kind of unbelievable. Yeah. I looked at her, my gaze gentle. I think so too. Meeting you in itself was an unbelievable thing. When we reached an intersection, she suddenly stopped. Her gaze drifted toward a cafe on the corner of the street. The cafe was tastefully designed, floor-to-ceiling glass windows, vintage wooden tables and chairs, an air of quiet calm. This place, she murmured. I feel like I've been here before. My heart tightened again. Yes, we came here once. That was after we had already grown quite close. One day during a walk, she brought me here. She said it used to be a place she came to often, that the lattes here were very authentic. She ordered a latte for me and an Americano for herself. I didn't really like coffee, especially bitter black coffee, but I didn't say anything. I just watched her sip her drink slowly, her posture elegant, like a painting. She didn't talk much that day. She simply sat there quietly. I could feel it. This place carried many memories of her and Makoto. Bringing me, there was perhaps her way of saying goodbye, without words. I stayed with her and finished that latte that was far too bitter for me. After that, she never brought me back again. And later on, whenever she waited for me by the bridge, there would always be an extra cup of warm milk tea in her hand, sometimes with pearls, sometimes with taro paste, always flavors I liked. She never explained. I never asked. Between us, there was a kind of unspoken understanding. Only once. Willow withdrew her gaze and looked at me. Yes, only once. I answered, why? I looked at her, hesitated for a moment, then decided to tell the truth. Because you realize I didn't really like coffee. So after that, whenever we met, what you held in your hand became milk tea instead. She froze. She looked down at the bouquet of irises in her arms, then back up at me. The emotions in her eyes were so complex I couldn't read them. After a long while, she finally spoke softly. Then, let's go buy milk tea now. My heart felt as if it had been gently brushed by a warm hand. Okay. In the end, we didn't cross the street. We turned around and walked down another road. There was a milk tea shop there, one we often went to later on. She ordered 2 cups of pearl milk tea, just like I remembered, less sugar, no ice. She handed one to me, her fingertips brushing lightly against the back of my hand. Warm. Holding that cup of milk tea, I felt the warmth travel all the way to my heart. We kept walking, and without realizing it, we arrived at the bridge. This was where our story began, and also where her pain was born. 3 years ago, after Makoto's betrayal and abandonment, Willow fell into a heartbreak that lasted nearly 2 years. During that time, she came to this bridge every single day, not to end her life. She once told me herself that she had felt that impulse, but the pride and reason carved deep into her bones always held her back. She simply liked watching the river beneath the bridge, watching the tireless fish swimming upstream against the current. She said that when she watched them, it felt like she was looking at herself, struggling in the mud. The first time I met her was right here. Back then, I was still a poor student. Every day, I took different routes on my walks, thinking about all kinds of wild, impractical questions. That day, I happened to pass by this bridge, and I saw her. She stood by the railing, wearing a white dress. Her figure was so slender it felt as though the wind could carry her away at any moment. She wasn't crying. There was no dramatic expression on her face. She was simply staring quietly at the surface of the river, her eyes so hollow it made my chest ache. I could feel the dense, inescapable sorrow radiating from her. I didn't dare approach her. I only lingered some distance away, pretending to admire the view, quietly watching her until she finally turned and left. The next day, just to be safe, I walked the same route again. Sure enough, at the same time, I saw her again. The same spot, the same posture. That time, I couldn't hold back. I walked over, stood beside her as if by chance, and spoke in the lightest tone I could manage. "Hi, are the fish here special in some way?" She was startled by my sudden voice and turned to look at me. There was a trace of wariness in her eyes, but very quickly she saw through the clumsy goodwill behind my attempt at conversation. She shook her head, her voice a little hoarse. "Nothing special." "Oh." I scratched my head, feeling the awkwardness settle in. "I thought maybe there was some kind of spectacle. I see you here every day." She froze for a moment, then understood. "I'm not going to do anything stupid," she said calmly. "I just like staying here for a while." "I know." I looked into her eyes and said seriously, "But the reason it's called an impulse is because you never know if there'll be that one time you won't be able to control it. Why not take a walk somewhere else?" I suggested. "Staring at the river all the time, your mood will get damp too." She didn't respond. She just looked at me quietly. And just like that, our connection began. After she grew tired of watching the fish beneath the water, she finally became willing to leave this bridge and walk with me. And I, even after I no longer had any reason to take this route, still walked here day after day, walking toward the bridge. And toward her, right here. I stood at the center of the bridge and spoke softly to Willow, who had stopped beside me. This is where we first met. She held a bouquet of irises and leaned against the railing, her gaze falling on the endlessly surging river below. The wind lifted the strands of hair at her temples, brushing across her pale cheek. The look in her eyes slowly overlapped with the one I had seen 3 years ago, the first time I met her. In it there was sorrow, there was confusion, and there was also a trace of longing. I turned my eyes toward the river as well, my voice tinged with remembrance and quiet emotion. "Back then, I asked you whether the fish here were anything special, and you answered, 'There's nothing special about them.'" She spoke suddenly, cutting me off. My heart lurched violently. I snapped my head around and stared at her. Time seemed to freeze in that instant. The traffic and bustle around us had faded into silent background noise. In my world, there was only her. At last, she slowly turned to look at me. At some point, her eyes had reddened. A thin veil of moisture blurred those beautiful eyes, making her vision hazy. Yet I knew she was trying hard to see me clearly. A tear slipped from the corner of her eye without warning. It traced the smooth line of her cheek and fell onto the pure white irises. And then she smiled. A smile streaked with tears, yet radiant like a rainbow after rain. She opened her mouth, and with a voice trembling with sobs, yet unmistakably clear and familiar, softly called my name. George, that form of address, one she used only when we were closest, hit my mind like a thunderclap. My body went rigid. The next second, she dropped the flowers in her arms. The white irises scattered across the ground. She threw herself into my embrace with all her strength, as if trying to fuse herself into my bones and blood. I felt her warm tears quickly soak through the fabric over my chest. Her body trembled faintly in my arms. I remember now. Her voice was muffled against my chest, but every word was unmistakably clear. "George, I remember everything. I remember that riddle. I remember you standing on the bridge like an idiot, clutching a huge bouquet of white irises while waiting for me. I remember how you hated coffee, yet still stayed with me and forced yourself to finish an entire cup of bitter latte. I remember the way your eyes lit up with focus and admiration whenever I talked about those dry, tedious financial theories. I remember the burning warmth in your palm the very first time you held my hand. I remember how, little by little, you grew in front of me, from a shy, awkward boy into a man strong enough to shield me from wind and rain. I remember us struggling together, traveling together, turning that empty apartment into a place that finally felt like home. I remember everything. I'm sorry, George. I'm so sorry. She broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably in my arms. And I, after a brief surge of wild joy and disbelief, was swallowed by a vast, aching tide of tenderness and pain. I wrapped my arms around her even tighter, pulling her slender body close. Lowering my head, I rested my chin against the crown of her hair, closed my eyes, and fought back the heat burning behind them. It's okay. My voice was hoarse, barely recognizable. It's all over now. You're back. That's enough. Yes, my girl had finally come back, carried with her 5 full years of memories, memories that belonged only to us. She had returned to my side. After all the twists and turns, everything had finally found its way back to where it was meant to be. Just like a rainbow, always waiting on the other side of the rain. In the 2 years after breaking up with Makoto, my world was colorless, gray. Every single day, I went to that bridge spanning the river, not because I want to die, but simply to watch the water flow beneath it. The world hidden below the surface fascinated me. Still, I would never allow myself to throw my life away over a failed relationship. Makoto wasn't worth that. Then one day, a slightly awkward, youthful voice sounded beside me. "Hi! Are the fish here anything special?" Startled, I turned around and saw a tall, slender boy. He wore a simple white t-shirt and jeans, a backpack slung over his shoulders. He looked like a student from a nearby university. His eyes were very clean, carrying a cautious kindness that softened the heart I'd armored with thorns since the breakup. I shook my head. My voice was a little hoarse. I hadn't spoken much in a long time. Nothing special. He looked embarrassed and scratched his head. "Oh, I thought there might be something interesting. I see you here every day." I immediately understood this was his clumsy attempt at starting a conversation. I felt both amused and strangely warmed. "I'm not going to do anything stupid," I reassured him. "I know," he said, meeting my eyes seriously, "but that's why it's called an impulse. You never know if there'll be that one time you can't control it." Then he added, "Why not walk somewhere else? Staring at the river all the time, your mood will get damp too." I didn't argue. Instead, I started rambling about a few fables related to fish. To my surprise, he responded by discussing evolutionary paths and the river's unique local species. Laughing, I asked if he studied biology. He shook his head. "Computer science. Biology is just a hobby." When it got late, I said a brief goodbye and headed home. Halfway back, a thought suddenly crossed my mind. Would he come again tomorrow? He did. After that, he really came every single day. We talked, though most of the time it was painfully awkward. He told me about von Neumann architecture, Turing machines, and low-level hardware structures. I could tell he didn't truly want to talk about those things. He just couldn't think of any other way to keep a conversation going with a stranger. I listened in a daze, and somehow I didn't mind. Compared to the monotonous sound of the river beneath the bridge, even this forced small talk felt more interesting. Watching him sweat through his clumsy attempts, I suddenly wanted to play along. Instead of guiding the conversation with normal social cues, I started talking nonsense too. I rambled about the Basel Accords and quantitative easing, analyzing how macroeconomic policy impacts markets. I enjoyed watching him struggle, completely baffled, yet still try his best to find places where he could say, "That's impressive," or "I see." When I threw questions back at him, his confusion only deepened, which I found oddly entertaining. Gradually, when I went to the bridge, the first thing that came to mind was no longer the fish beneath the water, but him, the boy I kept coincidentally running into every day. At some point, my heart, long thought dead, began to stir again because of his presence. His name was George, an ordinary name, yet it struck my stagnant heart like a stone, sending ripples across the surface. I began to find his eyes that tried so hard to appear worldly but were actually clean and sincere, unexpectedly cute, cuter than Makoto's. And what secretly pleased me most was that I could feel it. He was drawn to me too, more than once. He told me he had never met a girl like me before. He said my words carried weight and insight, that there was something powerful in the way I spoke. It made me laugh a little. I knew it wasn't a love confession. He wasn't that thick-skinned. There was no way he could deliver sweet talk so directly without blinking. And yet, those words that weren't love confessions but somehow surpassed them, were the ones that stirred the heart the deepest. One day, I grew tired of watching the fish beneath the bridge. I decided to leave that bridge and walk a different path. That evening I was still there, but instead of staring at the river, I was waiting for him. He arrived right on time. When he saw me standing by the roadside, he looked surprised. I smiled and took the first step forward. He froze for a second, then immediately followed, walking beside me. We didn't say a word, yet it felt like everything had already been said. From that day on, without ever making explicit, we began walking together every evening. He no longer needed an excuse to watch over me. I no longer needed company. And yet, neither of us could control ourselves. We kept walking, toward that bridge, and toward each other. We wandered through countless streets, chatting about everything and nothing, with no destination in mind. Once, I led him to a cafe I had once loved but hadn't visited in a long time, a place filled with memories of Makoto. I ordered him a latte and myself an Americano. I watched him lift the cup, frowned slightly at the rich aroma. That's when I realized he didn't like coffee, especially bitter coffee. But he didn't say anything. He stayed with me and quietly finished a cup that was far too bitter for him. After that, I never took him there again. Later, I started buying milk tea instead. He liked it. I liked it too. Between us, an unspoken understanding grew, quietly, naturally. Later still, he took a part-time job at a small flower shop on a street corner, working to earn his living expenses. From that day on, he always carried a faint floral scent, mixed with the warmth of sunlight. It lingered on him gently, and it smelled wonderful. One evening during our walk, he suddenly asked, "What kind of flowers do you like?" The glow of the setting sun spilled over the river and across his face, tinting his soft hair a warm shade of gold. I looked at him and, on a whim, felt like teasing him a little. I curved my brows and smiled like a cat that had just stolen a treat. "Irises." "Why?" he asked. "Because irises—" I deliberately dragged out the words, savoring the puzzled look on his face, "are associated with rainbows in ancient Greek mythology." "Rainbows?" He looked even more confused. "It's a riddle." I blinked at him mischievously. "And I've already made it very simple. Try to guess what's the answer to my riddle." I looked into his bright eyes. They were filled with curiosity about me, and with a faint trace of something he himself hadn't noticed yet, infatuation. In that instant, my heart began pounding wildly. What was the answer? The answer was, "You are the rainbow I was unbelievably lucky to meet after this long storm." The answer was, "George, I think I've fallen for you." Of course, I didn't say it out loud. I only looked at him, waiting, hoping that he could read the feelings I'd hidden inside that riddle. He didn't. This engineering student, his head full of code and formulas, simply couldn't grasp my roundabout, literary kind of romance. He scratched his head awkwardly and guessed things like rainbow bridges or seeing rainbows after storms. And I just smiled and shook my head, denying every single one. The next day, I went to the bridge to wait for him, just like always. From far away, I saw him, in his arms. He was holding a huge bouquet of pure white irises. Beneath the setting sun, he cradled the flowers like a devout believer holding all of his faith. My steps came to a halt. In that instant, my heart was struck by an immense, gentle force. He hadn't guessed the answer to the riddle, but he had given me something far more moving than the answer itself. He walked up to me and handed me the flowers, his cheeks faintly flushed. "I still couldn't figure it out," he said. "But I thought, if it's something you like, then giving it to you can't be wrong." I took the bouquet. The petals still carried traces of morning dew, and their crisp, clean fragrance wrapped around me instantly. I lowered my head, using the flowers to hide how embarrassingly red my eyes had become. Then I lifted my head and gave him a radiant smile. That bouquet of irises was placed in the most eye-catching white porcelain vase in my living room. From that day on, our relationship took a qualitative leap forward. He began appearing in my world more and more often. We ate together, watched movies together, curled up on the sofa together, talking about topics that never seemed to run dry. I started teaching him about business. He learned quickly. His ability to grasp concepts through analogy even surprised me. I realized then that he didn't just possess sincerity. He also had astonishing talent and intelligence worthy of that sincerity. I grew more and more certain of one thing. He wasn't meant to remain in a small pond. He might truly soar, and I was willing to be the wind beneath his wings. We got together. The following year, He graduated from university. With my encouragement, he decided to start his own business. I supported him without reservation, becoming his company's very first angel investor. When my parents found out, they were furious. So furious they nearly cut ties with me. They couldn't understand why I would give up Makoto, with his prominent family background, to choose this poor boy who, in their eyes, had nothing at all. They said I was crazy. Maybe I was. But I knew. I had never been more clear-headed. I was tired of the profit-driven calculations behind family-arranged marriages. Tired of my parents' marriage, a hollow partnership held together by appearances, where they merely coexisted while quietly tormenting each other. What I wanted was simple, a pure, clean love, and if that didn't exist, then I would rather not love at all, not marry at all. But I was lucky. I met George. He wasn't foolish. With my support and guidance, his new company grew at a pace far beyond both my expectations and my parents'. Their criticisms gradually faded away. I also began taking over the Liu family business, and everything moved steadily in a good direction. Then we got married. At the Civil Affairs office, holding those two little red booklets, we laughed like fools. He designed a one-of-a-kind wedding ring for me, engraved with the initials of our names. At the wedding, we made lifetime promises to each other. We bought a high-rise apartment in the city center, not large, but with a beautiful view. Together, we slowly turned it from an empty space into a home we loved. The walls were covered with photos from our travels around the world. On the snowy peaks of Switzerland, he wrapped me tightly in his coat and kissed the tip of my nose, red from the cold. In the lavender fields of Provence, I tucked a small bundle of purple flowers into his collar, and he smiled brighter than the sun. On the stone-paved streets of the capital, I wore a kimono and stood on tiptoe to steal a kiss on his cheek, only to be caught and kissed back until I nearly suffocated. And in our kitchen, I wore his white shirt with completely mismatched pink apron tied around my waist, flowers smudged across my face as I brandished a spatula at him. He stood to the side, watching my antics with that indulgent, helpless smile. Those moments of happiness were frozen by the camera and etched deep into my soul. I thought we would go on like that forever, happy and unchanged. Until that car accident. That day, we were walking home hand in hand, talking about our upcoming vacation plans. The sunlight was perfect. The breeze was gentle. I turned my head to look at his handsome profile, my heart filled with a sense of satisfaction and peace I had never known before. Then, a sharp, piercing screech of tires ripping against the ground tore through the calm. I instinctively turned my head. A black sedan, like a crazed beast, had lost control and was charging straight toward us, toward George. In that instant, time slowed to an endless crawl. My mind went completely blank. All reason, all thought vanished in a heartbeat. There was only one idea left. I couldn't let anything happen to him. I didn't hesitate. Using every ounce of strength of my body, I shoved him away with all my force. Bang! A massive impact struck me. I saw terror and despair flood his face in an instant. I saw the hand he reached out to me, useless, unable to save me. The world before my eyes rapidly drained of color, sinking into boundless darkness. George, I'm sorry. It seems I won't be able to walk the rest of the road with you.